Now, what are we looking at? Now, this kind of goes to, this is an evolution of how the rules used to be for what what companies could own what. Now, these used to be how many TV, radio stations, FM stations, and AM stations. Because remember, yes, we still have AM radio, but AM was much more prevalent. If you remember from our radio history chapter, was much more prevalent. But basically, from 53 to 84, that's a good chunk. I'm like right there in like the middle. I was born almost like in the middle there. And so I experienced a good chunk of my life. First part of my life was you couldn't own, well, same company couldn't own more than 7 AM stations, 7 FM stations, and 7 TV stations. That's the way it used to be. This seems important. I think, I don't know. You may see this someplace in the future. Hint. Anyway, so 7 AM, 7 FM, 7 TV stations. That was 53 to 84. 53 to 84. 53 to 84. All right? That's when the FCC established those rules. All right? Once again, right after World War II, we talked about how television was put on hold. This is where they started doing. They had the acts and they put stuff on hold for licensing and all that. So this was among those laws in 1953 of how many. This was one of them. How many stations they could own from FM, AM, and TV stations. And then it also, a single person or company could only own one radio station per market during that time. Okay, so you could own 7 different stations, but they had to be around the country. All right, so New York, Chicago, LA, so on and so forth, and FM and TV stations. They couldn't be in the same market, and that especially with radio stations. But that changed really, really quickly once the 1980s hit. Remember, precursor was with Carter from the late 70s into Reagan. That was 80 till about 1994, and from this, the rule was 20-20-12. So we went from 777 to 20-20-12. So from 1984 to about 1994, it was 20 AM radio stations, 20 FM radio stations, and 12 television stations. That looks important too. Hint, hint, hint. And now from a television station where we stand now, remember our old friend, we're going to talk about our old friend, the 1996 Telecommunications Act, which has caused all the big mega media conglomerate companies during the Clinton administration. They further even more, they deregulated even more. Now from a television station point, you can't have, and this is kind of a complicated equation for what they do it. You basically can't have more than 39% of the television eyes in the country. So you can own lots of different stations just as long as the amount of stations that you own isn't more than 39% of the total population of the country. So you can own, I own stations in New York and Chicago and Miami and LA, but then I might also own a station in Charlotte and maybe in Idaho, or because if you think about it, if you were to just go with the biggest markets everywhere, you would eventually break up. You get to the 39% a lot quicker because there's higher and lower populations in a given area. So that's why they have different markets. Every market there's a number of a market. Like 1 is New York, 2 is LA, 3 is Chicago. And it goes by the population and television and radio users and all that. And it goes down to like 251, and that's Glendive, Montana. I've never been there. I've never been to Montana, but that is the last market. And the market I'm in is central Pennsylvania. That's Harrisburg, York, Lancaster, and they include Lebanon, this town Lebanon, because it was the top right corner of the square. It's not this big, huge place, but yeah, York, Harrisburg, and Lancaster were the big cities in that area. It's gotten as high as 39. It's probably about like anywhere from 41 to 43 now. It changes depending on the changing numbers of a given area. So, but it's kind of let you know. So no more than 39% of TVIs when you're dealing with television now. But as we see, deregulation, it is continuing today. 1995, News Corp, my former place of employment. I first started in the industry in 1995. I started working in Fox in 98, but in 1996, hey, look at that. 95, they got the News Corp. They received a special dispensation allowing it to own and operate the Fox network and a number of local TV stations. So strangely enough, hey, look at that. They say that in 1995, and guess when the Fox News Channel was born? 1996. News Corp had already owned lots of television stations and around the world, lots of newspapers and magazines and stuff like that. And it wanted to expand its empire. And then, they had that 95, they had that dispensation. Then you had 96 with the Telecommunications Act. Once again, that had a big part to deal with not only News Corp, but the other major companies that we've been talking about. And then we come to the 1996 Telecommunications Act, and this is where it really changed. Big things. This is where we start seeing phone companies. They were allowed to own television and radio stations. Before this, they were not allowed to own this. They were not allowed to do cable, or they were only allowed to do phone stuff and own phone companies. So that was very strict with that. And the same thing with cable companies. They were not allowed to do phone service. So that's why sometimes you would see regionally in some local areas that when one county, what would probably normally be a phone company in one county, they would offer TV and radio, but they didn't offer phone service. And it's vice versa for the cable company. They'd offer phone service, but not cable. So I'm like, what are you doing? It was few and far between. It didn't happen that often, but it did happen. But after 96, this is where we start seeing cable offering, like Comcast. Now they offer phone service. That was never a possibility. That's why you have Verizon, and they've got Fios television, if some of you have that. So this is where it starts because of this. Before that, there were very strict rules. You could not own, if your phone company couldn't own a TV or radio station, if your cable company, you couldn't give out phone service. But it's changed after that. That seems important too. These all seem important. Like, which one of these doesn't belong here? Also, other things. Cable limit rates. This is where we start because in the early 90s, and from the 80s, late 80s to early 90s, though there was deregulation, there were still movements, especially in the early 90s, about with cable and how much they were charging. And so there were some rules in place, and then also public access. Remember, this is pre-internet, so not everybody could have a YouTube channel back then. If you wanted to be on television, you could go to your local cable company, and they could hook you up. It might have not been the greatest program, but that's how people were able to do that. Now anybody can have a TV, quote-unquote TV show, even though it's not really TV, on YouTube. But this is also where we start seeing cable rates, and packages started going up, and that's why you have a trillion. Even if you have not the most extensive cable package, you still have a whole lot of stations that you don't want. And there's still those people who are still fighting for a la carte. It's been gaining some traction, but remember, it's Comcast. They're a huge, monstrous conglomerate. They have lots of pull. Hey, remember, lobbyists lobbying. They end all the things that they own from a media standpoint. So they're not only distributing it, but they're also producing. So, but yeah, cable's rates. And then also, There's lots of promises. Hey, if we do this, we allow companies to become bigger and have lots of different media formats. Technology is going to go faster, and that did happen. But the problem was fewer voices. Now we only have a handful of companies that basically own so many different things, and the limit of voices, and it's not really all that good for free democratic society, which has become part of the problem, and how much influence they have with government and elected officials of all sorts of both sides of the aisle, who's promoting who, and then it becomes how's that coverage being from a news standpoint, because all these places have news coverage. How is that being affected? And in that, because they're supposed to be independent, but let's face facts, it's not really been the case very recently. Even with everything they say, there's so many other factors into it, which is important. It's something I keep throwing down your throats, and will continue to throw down your throats. Those are excuses, and it's the corruption of the system. We need to be above that. And then 2007, this is where they started to ease on newspaper and then broadcast how many newspapers you can own, especially within a given market. And if you own a TV and a radio station, those rules were relaxed, and that's further made made the companies even bigger. 2007 is when I left Fox News, first week in May. And then started going for my master's. I went back eventually, but this is where we start seeing where we are today. Other things, other major deals over the years. 95, Disney, they bought ABC, $19 billion. They've since bought other things, which are down there, but that was a huge coup for them. And then ESPN, now Monday Night Football's on ESPN. And I know lots of people work for ABC and Disney, and they're all part under that same corporate umbrella. Time Warner, they bought Turner Broadcasting for $7.5 billion. Ted Turner, that's one of the people that I have listed in your final project. You may want to do a thing on him. That was a huge deal, and he was named like vice president, but didn't have that job very long. After that, he was a major media mogul, TBS. You watch TBS or TNT, that's him. Turner Classic Movies, that's him, among other things. And he owned the Atlanta Braves for a little while. So, that was a big coup of him selling out. And then AOL, that the company doesn't exist anymore, really. They got so big, they acquired Time Warner, $164 billion. And then they got fed off eventually. They bought the Huffington Post. And then Verizon bought them out. It's everyone's throwing all this money around. It's like monopoly money. And then we talk about Comcast. We already know what they own NBC and Universal Films. And in 2009, that's its own mega media company. And then recently, as we go back to Disney, now they own the ABC, the ESPN, Marvel, Lucasfilm. Heck, they've even gotten into the film and TV libraries of 20th Century Fox, or 21st, what they call 21st Century Fox. So this is just, and now the Simpsons. Even the Simpsons are under the in the mouse years. So we've seen how big and how tremendous it's become. How does that benefit us? How does that hurt us? These are all things you have to think about. So basically, we're talking about consolidation, companies becoming one, all these things under the same umbrella. Here's what they call the Big Six with Comcast, 21st Century Fox, CBS, Viacom, Time Warner, Walt Disney, owning so many different things and so many different formats. Even if you think about Hulu, that was a cross-promotion of ownership stake in a lot of them, which is kind of amazing that these major companies would be able to compete on that level and not compete with other companies, but work together, because they've all decided, hey, we want to get in on this, so we'll allow distribution of our programming because they have a whole lot of it. So there's that aspect. So, but until the 80s, There were lots of rules against monopolies, and media was there for a while, but not so much anymore. It's on you next. You're going to get tagged in soon. Yeah, you'll get your first jobs, but eventually it's going to be land in your hands to deal with it and see what it is by that time. Um, the competition isn't nearly as much. You don't see too many independent television stations anymore, or film companies anymore, or radio stations anymore because they've been bought out by so many bigger companies, and they've gotten around it with monopolies because they've got different types of mass media. That's another reason why they've gotten so big. They've been allowed to have newspapers and magazines and PR and advertising and internet and TV and radio and movies and so on and so forth, but they're very careful to that they fall within the parameters. They're much looser parameters now, but they're always pushing what they are allowed to own, and they've created from a legal standpoint their own separate empires. All right, so that's it for this part. We will continue on with the next part, and it goes deeper into the whole aspect of the media business. So stay safe, be healthy, and you need to get a hold of me, all right? Talk to you later. Bye.